The scratch of Derek's pen against the divorce papers was a sound I'll carry with me forever. It wasn't just the mundane act of signing a document. It was the violent tearing of an 8-year tapestry, woven with dreams, promises, and, as I now understood, a fabric of carefully constructed lies. I sat across the polished mahogany table in the hushed courtroom, watching my soon-to-be ex-husband Derek. His lips curved into that familiar smug smile, a smirk I'd come to despise more than any harsh word he'd ever uttered. It was the smile of a victor, a man who believed he had expertly engineered my downfall, leaving me with nothing but the dust of a broken life. "Well, that was easier than I thought," Derek muttered, just loud enough for me and my pro bono lawyer, Mrs. Patterson, to hear. His voice dripped with an arrogance that had slowly, insidiously, chipped away at my self-worth over the years. It was the sound of a superiority complex made manifest, a verbal weapon he'd wielded to keep me small, to ensure I never quite believed in my own potential. He even had the audacity to add, "I almost feel bad for her. Almost." The word almost stung more than outright indifference, implying a fleeting, performative flicker of pity that quickly vanished into his vast sea of self-regard. It was a final, cruel twist of the knife, designed to diminish me further, even as our marriage crumbled around us. Judge Harrison, a formidable woman in her 60s with eyes that saw through pretense, peered over her glasses at Derek, her disapproval palpable. "Mr. Thompson, please show respect for these proceedings and your wife." "Soon-to-be ex-wife," Derek corrected with a chuckle, adjusting the lapel of his expensive navy suit. The same suit I'd helped him pick out last year for a promotion, back when I still believed we were a team, building a shared future. The bitter irony twisted in my gut. He continued, "And with all due respect, Your Honor, I think we can all agree this is long overdue. Amara will be much better off without me holding her back." Yet his words were a sickening echo of the narrative he'd meticulously crafted, both for the court and for himself. He, the ambitious visionary, me, the anchor weighing him down. The sheer audacity of his statement almost made me laugh in a deranged, bitter way. He was the one who had insisted I quit my thriving marketing job, convincing me it was to support his burgeoning career. He was the one who had dissolved our separate bank accounts, proclaiming that married couples should share everything. He was the one who had systematically, subtly, yet ruthlessly dismantled my independence, piece by painful piece, all while constructing his own glittering empire. And now he sat there, bathed in the false glow of benevolence, pretending he was doing me a monumental favor. My hands, hidden in my lap, clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms, a desperate attempt to anchor myself, to suppress the tremor that threatened to expose my inner turmoil. My simple black dress felt like a uniform of defeat, stark against Derek's polished, triumphant appearance. It was precisely the image he intended to project, the successful, driven businessman, divorcing his struggling, unambitious wife who simply couldn't keep pace with his grand vision. Preston, Derek's shark-faced attorney, a man whose hourly rate exceeded most people's weekly wages, leaned over to whisper something in Derek's ear. They both glanced at me, sharing a conspiratorial smile. I didn't need to hear their words. Their expressions screamed of victory, of a battle won before it had even truly begun. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her. Candace, Derek's blonde, ambitious, and utterly ruthless secretary turned mistress. She sat in the back row, attempting to appear inconspicuous in a fiery red dress and designer heels, a blatant symbol of my replacement. She was everything Derek now claimed to want, everything he believed I wasn't. Cutthroat, unburdened by empathy, and willing to use any means necessary to climb the ladder of success, including leveraging a married man's ambition. The irony, a sharp, cold blade, wasn't lost on me. He was divorcing me to marry another woman, yet I was the one who looked desperate, alone, and discarded in this cold courtroom. "Mrs. Thompson?" Judge Harrison's voice cut through my swirling thoughts, addressing me directly. I straightened in my chair, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Do you have anything you'd like to say before we finalize these proceedings?" My mouth opened, then closed. A silent scream caught in my throat. What could I say? That my husband had not only cheated but systematically drained my financial autonomy? That he'd woven a tangled web of deceit, making sure every asset was solely in his name, leaving me financially vulnerable before casting me aside like yesterday's news? The cold, hard facts were all laid out in the legal documents, but they couldn't possibly convey the emotional devastation of 8 years ending with such calculated cruelty, such callous disregard. "No, Your Honor," I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to Derek's booming confidence. Derek's smirk widened, a silent affirmation of his perceived dominance. "See, even she knows this is for the best." Mrs. Patterson, my kind, older lawyer, shuffled her papers nervously. She had warned me this would be an uphill battle. Derek commanded a superior legal team, possessed far greater resources, and had meticulously positioned himself advantageously in every facet of our divorce. According to the proposed settlement, I would retain the house, heavily mortgaged and a financial drain, our ancient Honda, a relic in constant need of repair, and a meager monthly alimony payment that would barely cover basic living expenses. Meanwhile, Derek would walk away with his wildly successful consulting business, his sleek BMW, his luxury boat, and his substantial retirement accounts. He'd even cleverly stashed several assets offshore, a fact we suspected but couldn't prove. "Before we conclude," Mrs. Patterson interjected suddenly, standing up and clearing her throat, her voice regaining a measure of its usual composure, "there is one matter we need to address regarding Mrs. Thompson's inheritance from her late father." Derek's triumphant smile faltered, a hairline crack appearing in his facade. "What inheritance? Her dad was a janitor who died 5 years ago." The dismissive way he uttered janitor ignited a fire in my blood. My father, Robert, had been so much more than that. He'd worked multiple jobs to provide for our family after my mother passed away. A night janitor, yes, but also a skilled maintenance worker, a handyman, and, as I would soon discover, a silent force in various small business ventures. Derek had never respected my father, always treating him as if he were beneath us, socially and economically. "That's what we're here to clarify," Mrs. Patterson replied calmly, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she reached into her briefcase, a detail that now, in retrospect, takes on a whole new meaning. "It appears there are some legal documents that were never properly processed after Mr. Robert Mitchell's passing." Judge Harrison leaned forward, a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. "What kind of documents?" "His last will and testament, Your Honor. Due to some administrative oversights at the probate court, it was never officially read or executed." Derek laughed, a harsh, derisive sound that grated on my nerves. "This is ridiculous. We're wasting the court's time over some old man's will. What could he possibly have left her? His collection of work boots?" Candace giggled from the back row, and Derek turned to wink at her, their public display of affection a cruel, stinging slap in the face, but something in Mrs. Patterson's expression, a subtle shift in her gaze, sparked a tiny, unexpected flame of hope within me, a feeling I hadn't dared to entertain in months. She wasn't the type to introduce irrelevant legal documents just to prolong proceedings. There was a quiet knowing in her eyes, a silent assertion that she possessed information Derek did not. "Your Honor," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice gaining strength, "I request that we postpone the finalization of this divorce until Mr. Mitchell's will can be properly read and executed, as it may significantly impact the division of assets." Derek's attorney, Preston, shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly a stall tactic. Mr. Mitchell passed away 5 years ago. Any inheritance would have been processed long ago." "Not necessarily," Judge Harrison replied thoughtfully. "If there were administrative errors in the probate process, the will could still be legally valid and unexecuted." "Mrs. Patterson, do you have documentation to support this claim?" Mrs. Patterson handed a thick folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. As Judge Harrison began reviewing the documents, the courtroom fell silent, save for the rhythmic rustle of turning pages and the increasingly agitated sound of Derek's breathing. I watched, a strange sense of detachment washing over me, as my husband's confident facade slowly, visibly, began to crack. He kept glancing back at Candace, then at Preston, then at the judge, a growing panic in his eyes. For the first time since this whole agonizing process began, Derek looked uncertain, truly unnerved. "This is highly irregular," Preston muttered, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a strained whisper. Judge Harrison finally looked up from the documents, her expression unreadable. "I'm going to need time to review these materials properly. This court will recess for 1 week to allow for proper examination of Mr. Robert Mitchell's estate and will." Derek shot to his feet, indignation blazing in his eyes. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We can't postpone our entire divorce because of some paperwork mix-up from 5 years ago." "Mr. Thompson, I suggest you lower your voice in my courtroom," Judge Harrison replied sternly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I suggest you take this week to consider that there might be more to your wife's family than you assumed." As the judge's gavel came down, declaring court adjourned, I saw something I'd never witnessed in Derek's eyes before. Fear, pure unadulterated fear. For 8 years, he had meticulously controlled every aspect of our relationship, always staying one step ahead, always holding all the cards. But now, for the very first time, he didn't know what was coming next, and neither did I. But in that moment, a tiny, defiant spark ignited within me, a flicker of something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. 6 months earlier, my world had been entirely different. A world where I trusted my husband implicitly, where I genuinely believed our marriage, despite its occasional rough patches, was solid. My biggest worry then? Whether Derek would remember to pick up groceries on his way home from work. It was a Tuesday evening in March when the illusion shattered. I remember the exact date because it was the day after our 8th wedding anniversary, which Derek, with his usual self-absorption, had completely forgotten until I awkwardly reminded him at breakfast. He'd made a half-hearted promise to make it up to me with a special dinner that weekend, but predictably, work had, as usual, gotten in the way. Derek's consulting firm had been experiencing meteoric growth over the past few years. What had begun as a modest business advisory service had mushroomed into a major operation, boasting an impressive roster of corporate clients and lucrative government contracts. I genuinely felt a swell of pride in his success, even though it increasingly translated into longer hours, more frequent travel, and a growing chasm of time and emotional distance between us. I rationalized it, telling myself it was merely a temporary phase. Once the business was firmly established, I believed, we would finally have the time and financial security to start the family we'd discussed for years. I had spent that particular Tuesday at home, engrossed in my freelance graphic design projects, a desperate attempt to generate some independent income. This shift had begun 3 years prior when Derek had suggested I quit my full-time marketing position. "We don't need the stress of 2 demanding careers," he'd purred, his voice laced with persuasive charm. "This way, you can focus on the creative work you love, and I can build something big enough for both of us." At the time, it had seemed incredibly romantic. My husband, my protector, wanted to care for me, to grant me the freedom to pursue my passion projects. I didn't realize then that financial independence and creative freedom were 2 vastly different things, and that losing the first would, over time, gradually erode the second. My passion, once a vibrant flame, had dwindled to a timid flicker under the suffocating blanket of financial dependency. That Tuesday evening, around 5 p.m., Derek called to inform me he would be working late again. His secretary, Candace, was helping him prepare for a big presentation, he explained, emphasizing the urgent need to get everything perfect before a crucial client meeting the following morning. It wasn't an unusual occurrence. Candace had been working closely with Derek for about a year, and initially I had felt a perverse gratitude that he had such a dedicated assistant to help manage his increasingly frantic schedule. I'd met Candace several times at company events. She had always struck me as outwardly pleasant, almost too eager to please, yet there was something about her perpetually bright smile and an overly familiar way she spoke about Derek that had always made me subtly uncomfortable. She was the kind of woman who meticulously remembered everyone's personal details, making a point of asking about your life in a manner that felt both intensely caring and eerily intrusive. "Derek talks about you constantly," she'd told me at the Christmas party just a few months prior, her voice saccharine. "He's so lucky to have someone who understands his ambition. Not every woman would be supportive of a husband who works as hard as he does." At the time, I'd accepted it as a genuine compliment, a testament to my supportive wife status. Looking back, I realized it was likely a carefully orchestrated test, a probe to gauge how much I truly knew about the exact number of hours Derek was really working, and with whom. That Tuesday evening, a spontaneous impulse seized me. I decided to surprise him. I'd spent the afternoon lovingly preparing his favorite lasagna, and the thought occurred to me that I could drive to his office with dinner for both him and Candace. It seemed like a thoughtful, supportive wife gesture. Perhaps Candace, working late alongside him, would also appreciate a warm home-cooked meal. Derek's office was situated in a converted warehouse downtown, a space he had meticulously renovated into a sleek, modern workspace, a testament to his burgeoning success. The building was typically locked after business hours, but Derek had, months ago, given me the security code, a small token of trust in our crumbling marriage. The parking lot was almost deserted, save for Derek's gleaming BMW and a red Mercedes I instantly recognized as Candace's car. I used my keycard to enter through the main lobby, carefully balancing the warm casserole dish and a bag containing a fresh salad and breadsticks. The elevator ascending to Derek's floor seemed to crawl, an eternity of anticipation. I found myself feeling a surprising flutter of excitement, imagining his surprise, and perhaps a small reconnection between us. We had grown distant lately, both of us consumed by our separate daily routines, and I desperately hoped this impromptu gesture might bridge the growing chasm. The elevator doors sighed open onto Derek's floor, and I immediately noticed that most of the office lights were off. Only a warm, inviting glow emanated from Derek's corner office, illuminating the otherwise dark, silent workspace. I could distinctly hear voices coming from that direction, and I smiled, picturing Derek and Candace hunched over spreadsheets and presentation slides, diligently working late into the night. I was halfway across the main office area when I heard Derek laugh. Not his polite, professional, client-facing laugh, but the deep, genuine, unrestrained laugh he once reserved exclusively for me. The sound arrested me, freezing me in my tracks. And that's when I heard Candace's voice, low and intimate, in a way that made my stomach clench with a sudden, icy dread. "You're terrible," she purred, but her tone was overtly playful, flirtatious, a siren song of illicit desire. "What if someone comes in?" "Nobody's coming in," Derek replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice, a smile that once belonged only to me. "Besides, I pay the rent on this place. I should be able to do whatever I want here." My hands started trembling uncontrollably, the casserole dish threatening to slip from my grasp. Every instinct screamed at me to announce my presence, to call out, to shatter the sordid tableau unfolding before me. But something held me frozen in place, hidden behind a partition wall, condemned to listen as my marriage, my entire world, slowly, irrevocably, fell apart, one damning word at a time. "I love when you get all possessive and powerful," Candace purred, her voice dripping with adoration. "It's so different from how you are at home." The casual, almost possessive way she referenced my home, my marriage, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a nascent affair, a fleeting indiscretion. This was an established, deeply entrenched relationship, replete with its own inside jokes and intimate rhythms. "Don't talk about home," Derek said, and for a fleeting, desperate moment, I clung to a fragile hope that he was drawing a boundary, protecting the sanctity of our marriage. But that hope was instantly crushed by Candace's mocking retort. "You know that situation is complicated." She laughed, a brittle, cruel sound. "Is that what we're calling your wife now? Amara is—" Derek's voice trailed off, a pathetic attempt to soften the impending blow. "She's a good person, but she doesn't understand what it takes to build something real. She's content with small dreams, small goals. She doesn't push me to be better like you do." I pressed my back against the cold partition wall, fighting a sudden wave of nausea. This was how Derek truly saw me. As someone holding him back, a drag on his boundless potential. The bitter irony twisted in my gut. He was the one who had encouraged me to scale back my own ambitions, to devote myself to his. "When are you going to tell her?" Candace pressed, her voice edged with impatience. "Soon. I need to get the business restructured first, make sure all the assets are properly positioned. I can't afford to lose half of everything I've built because I was careless about timing." "You mean half of everything we've built?" Candace corrected, a possessive edge to her voice. "I've been working just as hard as you have to grow this company." "Of course, baby. We built this together. That's why I need to be smart about how I handle the divorce. Amara thinks she's entitled to half of everything just because we're married, but she has no idea how much this business is really worth now. Divorce. The word hits me like a physical sledgehammer, a cold, hard blow to the chest. He was already planning to divorce me, already meticulously calculating how to minimize my share, how to leave me with as little as possible. While I was worrying about us growing apart, he had been actively plotting my demise, making me his unwitting pawn in a game of financial chess. While I made him his favorite lasagna and worried about his vegetable intake, he was dispassionately dissecting our marriage, strategizing its termination. "She's going to be so shocked," Candace said with obvious satisfaction, a cruel, triumphant gleam in her voice. "She really has no clue, does she?" "None at all. She still thinks I'm the same guy she married 8 years ago, struggling to get his business off the ground. She has no idea about the government contracts, the offshore accounts, any of it. As far as she knows, we're barely breaking even." They were both laughing now, a chorus of mockery that resonated like shattered glass in my chest. I thought about all the times Derek had admonished me to be careful with money, to tighten our belts because the business was still touch and go. He'd made me feel guilty for buying new clothes, for too many groceries. All the while, he'd been hiding a fortune, planning to keep it all for himself. "I should feel guilty," Derek continued, a pathetic attempt at self-justification. "But honestly, she's been so checked out lately. All she does is sit at home working on those little design projects that barely pay anything. She has no ambition, no drive. Sometimes I think she'd be happier without the pressure of being married to someone who's actually trying to succeed in life." That was the final, breaking straw. Derek wasn't just cheating on me and planning to divorce me. He was systematically rewriting our entire shared history, twisting the narrative to cast himself as the victim, and me as the incompetent, unmotivated spouse. I was the one who had sacrificed my burgeoning career to champion his dreams. I was the one who had meticulously managed our household, graciously entertained his demanding clients, and worked thankless freelance jobs that barely covered our bills, all because he'd convinced me his business, our business, needed every single resource to grow. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking so violently I could barely maintain my grip on the now cold casserole dish. I somehow managed to reach the elevator without them hearing me, the soft ding of the doors closing a final, mournful punctuation mark on the end of my marriage. Once inside, I completely fell apart. 8 years. 8 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of unwavering belief, and this was how little I'd meant to him. I wasn't even worth an honest conversation about his unhappiness. I was merely an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved, and eventually a burden to be discarded. The drive home was a blur of tears, disbelief, and a profound, bone-deep sense of betrayal. I kept grasping for some elusive explanation, some missing context that would soften the brutal reality of what I'd heard. Perhaps they were discussing a convoluted business partnership. Perhaps Derek was merely venting his frustrations, words he didn't truly mean. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew. I recognized the intimate cadence in their voices, the casual familiarity that spoke of a relationship that had been simmering for months, perhaps even longer. When I finally reached our house, I impulsively hurled the lasagna into the trash, its once comforting aroma now a foul stench of deceit. I sank into a chair at our kitchen table, my gaze fixed on the wedding photos adorning the wall. In every image, Derek and I radiated happiness, love, a shared commitment to building a life together. I desperately tried to pinpoint the moment that had changed, the precise inflection point when I had transformed from his cherished partner into a mere situation. Derek eventually arrived home around midnight, whistling a cheerful tune as he sauntered through the door. He found me still sitting at the kitchen table, though I had meticulously wiped away my tears, composed my features, and donned a mask of normalcy. "Hey, babe," he said, pressing a perfunctory kiss to the top of my head, completely oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. "Sorry I'm so late. That presentation kicked my ass, but I think we nailed it." Every fiber of my being screamed to confront him then and there, to demand answers, honesty, an explanation for his monstrous deception. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the lingering shock, or perhaps a primal survival instinct, a quiet voice within whispering that I needed to be smarter, more strategic. If Derek was indeed orchestrating a divorce and systematically concealing his assets, I needed to be prepared. I needed to understand the full scope of his treachery before I revealed my hand. "That's great, honey," I managed to say, my voice a delicate tightrope walk between normalcy and utter devastation. "I'm proud of you." He smiled, utterly self-satisfied, and headed upstairs to shower, completely oblivious to the fact that our marriage had just irrevocably ended in his downtown office. As I listened to the comforting gush of water, a chilling realization washed over me. The man I had loved and trusted for 8 years was in essence a complete stranger. And if he could lie to me so effortlessly about something so fundamental, so sacred, what else had he been lying about? That night marked the beginning of the longest 6 months of my life, a surreal existence of feigning normalcy while secretly scrambling to understand and prepare for the inevitable storm. But it was also the genesis of my slow, painful rediscovery of the woman I had been before Derek had convinced me to shrink myself, to contort my aspirations to fit into his suffocating vision of the perfect supportive wife. I just had no idea then how profoundly my father's memory and his long-hidden legacy was about to change everything. 2 weeks after that harrowing discovery in Derek's office, a thick fog of denial and desperation still clung to me. Every day I secretly hoped I had misunderstood, that there was some innocent explanation for Derek's chilling words about divorce and hidden assets. But each passing day brought fresh, undeniable evidence of his deepening deception. He became even more secretive with his phone, taking calls in hushed tones behind closed doors, working late almost every night, his excuses growing increasingly flimsy. He also began making subtle, insidious criticisms about my freelance work, dismissive comments about how I was wasting my potential on small projects instead of thinking bigger. I now recognize these as carefully planted seeds, groundwork for his fabricated narrative of why our marriage had failed, painting me as unambitious and unmotivated. Finding a lawyer proved to be more challenging than I anticipated. Derek, with his expansive business network, seemed to know every attorney in town. The terrifying prospect of word getting back to him before I was ready kept me paralyzed. Finally, through an online women's support group, a lifeline in my despair, I discovered Mrs. Patterson. She specialized in guiding women through difficult divorces, particularly cases fraught with hidden assets or financial manipulation. Her office was housed in an older, unassuming building downtown, a stark contrast to the gleaming glass tower where Derek's high-powered attorney operated. Mrs. Patterson herself, in her early 60s, had a comforting halo of graying hair and kind eyes that twinkled behind wire-rimmed glasses. She offered me tea and spoke in a gentle, reassuring voice that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, that perhaps I wasn't losing my mind after all. "Tell me about your situation, Amara," she said, settling back into her chair, a legal pad poised in her hand. I started with the affair, recounting in a halting voice what I had overheard in Derek's office. Mrs. Patterson listened, nodding sympathetically, but she didn't appear particularly surprised. I imagined she had heard countless variations of my story before. "And he mentioned restructuring assets and positioning them for a divorce?" she probed gently. "Yes, he said something about not wanting me to get half of what he'd built, and he explicitly mentioned offshore accounts. I had no idea we even had offshore accounts." Mrs. Patterson meticulously jotted down notes as I spoke, her pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. "How long have you been married?" 8 years. We started dating 10 years ago, right after I graduated college. "And what was your financial situation when you married?" I cast my mind back to those early days, a simpler time when Derek was just launching his consulting business, and I was working at an entry-level marketing firm downtown. We were both young, hopeful, naive, living in a cramped apartment, brimming with shared dreams of our future together. We were both pretty much starting from nothing. Derek had just launched his business, and I was working an entry-level job. We pooled our meager resources to get by, but there wasn't much to pull. "When did you quit your job?" 3 years ago. Derek said it would be better for his business if I could be more flexible, help with entertaining clients, and managing our home life. He convinced me that my salary wasn't worth the stress it was causing both of us. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her notes, her gaze direct. "And since then, you've been financially dependent on Derek?" I do freelance graphic design work, but it doesn't pay much. Derek handles all our major finances. I have access to our joint checking account for household expenses, but he manages everything else. I've always just trusted him. Do you know the extent of his business assets? That's just it, I said, a wave of foolishness washing over me. I thought I did, but apparently not. Derek always told me the business was just getting by, that we needed to be careful with spending. But from what I overheard, it sounds like he's been making a lot more money than I knew about. A lot more. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her voice softening, yet laced with a sobering frankness. Amara, I need to be honest with you about what you're facing here. If Derek has been planning this divorce for months and positioning assets accordingly, he's got a significant advantage. Hiding marital assets is illegal, but it's also very difficult to prove, especially if he's had time to move money around, to bury it deep within a labyrinth of shell companies. My heart sank, a cold stone in my chest. So there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that, Mrs. Patterson interjected, her voice firm. But you need to understand that this is going to be an uphill battle. Derek has resources. He has had ample time to prepare, and he clearly has experience with complex financial transactions. You're starting from behind, Amara, but you are not without options. She pulled out a thick folder and began laying out a daunting list of documents I would need to gather. Tax returns, bank statements, business records, anything that could help establish the true extent of Derek's assets. The problem is, most of this information is probably in Derek's control. Joint tax returns will show some of his income, but if he's been hiding assets offshore or in intricate business partnerships, that won't show up on documents you have easy access to. What about his business? I asked, clutching at straws. I know some of his clients, and I've attended company events. Doesn't that give me some claim to what he's built? Mrs. Patterson's expression was gentle, but unequivocally realistic. In theory, yes. As his spouse, you're entitled to half of any marital assets, including business growth that occurred during your marriage. But Derek's business is structured as a separate entity, and if he's been careful about how he's documented your contributions, it's going to be very difficult to establish your claim to those assets. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in my eyes. So, he can just cheat on me, lie to me for months, hide money from me, and then divorce me, leaving me with nothing? Not nothing, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, her voice radiating a quiet strength. You're entitled to spousal support, and you have rights that Derek can't simply ignore. But I want you to have realistic expectations about what we're dealing with here. She then showed me a chart outlining typical divorce settlements in cases like mine. Even in the most optimistic scenario, I was looking at a modest monthly alimony payment, perhaps half the equity in our house, which wasn't much, given Derek had refinanced it several times to fund his business ventures, and a small, hard-won settlement if we could painstakingly prove the existence of hidden assets. What about the house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You'll probably get to keep it, but Derek will demand half the equity, and you'll be solely responsible for the mortgage payments. Can you afford that on your potential income? I did the math in my head, a dizzying whirlwind of numbers, and the brutal truth crystallized. I couldn't. The mortgage payment alone far exceeded what I could realistically earn from my freelance work, and that didn't even factor in utilities, property taxes, or the inevitable maintenance costs. So I'll have to sell it? Most likely, yes. And after paying Derek his share and covering the substantial selling costs, you'll probably have just enough for a deposit on a small apartment and perhaps a few months of basic expenses. The harsh reality was starting to sink in, a cold, bitter pill. Derek wasn't just leaving me. He was meticulously ensuring that I would be forced to start over from scratch, from absolute zero, while he seamlessly transitioned into his new life with Candace, basking in the glow of the wealth they had built together, often at my expense. There is one thing that might help, Mrs. Patterson said, a flicker of something in her eyes as she flipped through her notes. You mentioned your father passed away 5 years ago. Did he leave any assets, any inheritance of note? Not really. Dad worked hard his whole life, but he wasn't wealthy. He left me a few $1,000s and some personal items, but I used most of the money for his funeral expenses. What about property? Business interests? Even small investments can add up over time. I shook my head, a pang of sadness mixed with resignation. Dad was a janitor, and he did some handyman work on the side. He rented a small apartment his whole life. He never owned property or had any business investments that I knew of. He was a simple, honest man. Mrs. Patterson made a note, her pen poised thoughtfully. Sometimes people have assets that their families don't know about. Small business partnerships, investments, even life insurance policies that weren't processed properly. Do you have any of your father's papers? Some. They're in storage in our basement. I never went through everything because it was too painful right after he died. I just packed it away and tried to forget. I'd recommend taking a thorough look through those documents. Sometimes there are surprises, and even a small inheritance could give you more leverage in the divorce proceedings. Something to push back with. As our meeting concluded, Mrs. Patterson outlined her fee structure, graciously offering to work with me on a payment plan, recognizing the limitations of my current financial resources. She also provided a comprehensive list of immediate steps. Start documenting everything, Amara. Gather whatever financial records you can access, and begin establishing your own credit and separate bank accounts. Most importantly, she stressed, her eyes fixed on mine as I prepared to leave, do not, under any circumstances, let on to Derek that you know about the affair or that you're planning to file for divorce. The element of surprise is one of the few advantages you have right now. Use it wisely. Driving home, a crushing wave of overwhelming dread washed over me. The enormity of what I was facing felt insurmountable. Derek had spent months, perhaps even years, meticulously preparing for this divorce, while I had been blissfully, tragically oblivious. He had money, a formidable team of lawyers, and a clear, calculated plan. I had a pro bono attorney and the rather quaint advice to sift through my deceased father's old papers. But as I pulled into our driveway, seeing Derek's gleaming BMW already nestled in the garage, a fierce, defiant promise solidified within me. I might be starting from behind, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. If Derek wanted to systematically dismantle our marriage and leave me with nothing, he was going to have to fight for it. He was going to have to truly earn his victory, and I would make him pay for every ounce of pain he had inflicted. That evening, after Derek had finally gone to bed, citing exhaustion from another long, presumably productive day at the office, I crept downstairs to our basement storage room. The air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten things, a poignant echo of my own neglected past. Among the haphazard stacks of Christmas decorations and discarded furniture, I located the boxes containing my father's belongings, packed away with such painful haste 5 years ago. As I pried open the first box, the sight of my father's familiar, careful handwriting on old receipts and faded business cards sent a fresh wave of grief and regret crashing over me. Dad had always been so incredibly proud of me, so unwavering in his support of my dreams. What would he think of the wretched situation I had allowed myself to fall into? What would he say about Derek's callous betrayal and my own naive, trusting heart? But as I began the arduous task of sorting through the papers, a strange sense of unease began to settle over me. I started to notice anomalies, things that simply didn't align with my carefully curated memory of my father's humble, simple life. Business cards for companies I'd never heard of, some with impressive corporate logos. Receipts for surprisingly expensive equipment, not tools for a handyman, but industrial-grade machinery. Correspondence with lawyers and accountants, professional letterheads that spoke of complex financial dealings. Perhaps Mrs. Patterson was right. Perhaps there were surprises waiting to be discovered, hidden beneath the unassuming surface of my father's life. I had no idea then just how profoundly right she was. As I sat there, surrounded by dusty boxes on the cold concrete floor of our basement, sifting through the tangible remnants of my father's life, memories of Robert Mitchell came flooding back. The harsh fluorescent light cast long, dancing shadows across the floor, yet in my mind, I was transported back to my childhood, a vivid, sepia-toned tableau. I struggled to reconcile the man I remembered, the quiet, dependable janitor, with the mysterious, intriguing documents I was now unearthing. My father had been the unwavering North Star of my life. After my mother tragically died when I was just 12, he had, without missing a beat, stepped into both parental roles, a feat of quiet strength and unparalleled devotion. While other single fathers might have floundered, struggling with the emotional and practical demands of such a profound transition, Dad had seamlessly managed everything, from patiently helping me with my homework, painstakingly explaining complex equations, to the surprisingly tender act of braiding my hair for school dances. His hands, calloused from his work, were always gentle, always present. "Your mama always said you were special, Amara," he used to tell me during those difficult, grief-stricken months after her passing. "She made me promise to make sure you knew how smart and capable you are. You're going to do things in life that'll make us both proud." His words, imbued with a profound love and unwavering belief, had been the bedrock of my burgeoning self-esteem. Dad worked nights as a janitor at the imposing office complex downtown, a towering edifice of glass and steel. The same building, a chilling twist of fate, where Derek's company was now located. The bitter irony of that fact was not lost on me as I rifled through receipts and business cards that hinted at a life far richer, far more complex than I had ever imagined. Dad would leave for work just as I was finishing dinner, a quick, reassuring hug, and he'd be home in time to meticulously prepare my breakfast before school, a quiet ritual of love and routine. I never felt as though I was missing out on having a father around because he imbued every moment we spent together with a profound sense of presence and value. But even as a child, there had always been other, subtle currents running beneath the surface of Dad's life, activities I didn't fully comprehend. He would have meetings on weekends, hushed gatherings with impeccably dressed men in expensive suits who would arrive at our small apartment. They'd sit at our kitchen table, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of my father's work clothes, their voices low, almost conspiratorial, discussing investments, opportunities, and partnerships. While I, a child blissfully unaware of the deeper implications, watched cartoons in the living room, these enigmatic conversations formed the soundtrack of my father's secret life. When I'd innocently inquire about these mysterious meetings, Dad would simply smile, ruffle my hair with his rough, kind hand, and dismiss it with a familiar refrain. "Business stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. Your job is to focus on school and being a kid." And I, with the unquestioning faith of a child, had accepted that explanation without a shred of doubt. Dad was perpetually involved in some side hustle or another. He'd meticulously fix cars for our neighbors in the apartment complex's parking lot, the clang of wrenches a familiar evening lullaby. He performed handyman work for various local businesses, his skilled hands capable of repairing almost anything. And occasionally, he would vanish for entire weekends on what he vaguely termed consulting jobs. I, in my youthful naivete, had simply assumed it was all his tireless way of earning extra money to ensure we were comfortable, secure. Now, as I meticulously examined his papers, a far more complex and sophisticated business life than I had ever conceived began to unfold before my astonished eyes. There were intricate contracts for large-scale construction projects, invoices for prohibitively expensive heavy equipment rentals, and detailed correspondence with lawyers and accountants who clearly regarded my father as far more than a mere part-time handyman. One particular business card arrested my attention. It belonged to a Thomas Crawford, embossed with elegant gold lettering that proudly proclaimed Crawford Development Group Commercial Real Estate. On the reverse side, in my father's distinctive, neat handwriting, were columns of numbers that unmistakably resembled dollar amounts, meticulously followed by percentages and dates. I discovered similar cards for a dozen other businesses, construction companies, property management firms, and investment groups, each card adorned with my father's meticulous notes, tracking what appeared to be complex financial relationships or ongoing business deals. There was also a well-worn, leather-bound appointment book, meticulously detailing the last 2 years of Dad's life. As I carefully flipped through its pages, I saw meetings scheduled almost every week with a bewildering array of various business contacts. These were not casual coffee meetings. They were formal appointments at sleek downtown offices, ingeniously scheduled around Dad's night janitor shifts, carefully planned to seamlessly integrate into his deceptively complicated schedule. One entry in particular leapt out at me, sending a shiver down my spine. Meeting with Harrison and Associates, 2 p.m., Tuesday, re Amara's future. The date was just 6 months before Dad died. Re Amara's future. What had Dad been planning for my future? And who, I wondered, were Harrison and Associates? I found the answer in another box, tucked securely inside an old manila envelope. It was a business card for Harrison and Associates, attorneys at law, accompanied by a handwritten note penned by someone named Judge Harrison. The note read, "Robert, thank you for your trust in our firm. We'll make sure everything is handled exactly as you specified. Amara will be well taken care of when the time comes. Judge Harrison." The same stern, silver-haired judge who was currently overseeing my divorce case. The coincidence seemed not only impossible but impossibly profound. Yet there it was, the business card, with the familiar name and address. As I continued my frantic search, I uncovered bank statements that defied everything I thought I knew about my father. Dad had always been so meticulously careful with money, scrupulously managing every penny. But these statements revealed regular, substantial deposits of thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, stretching back years. The deposits originated from a diverse array of sources: Crawford Development Group, Mitchell and Associates Construction, Riverside Property Management, and several others. Mitchell and Associates Construction. Dad's name was an integral part of the company name, a blatant implication that he wasn't merely an employee or a contractor. He was a partner, or an owner, of multiple businesses. I unearthed incorporation papers that unequivocally confirmed my burgeoning suspicions. Robert Mitchell was explicitly listed as a founding partner in Mitchell and Associates Construction, a 25% owner of Crawford Development Group, and held significant stakes in 4 other companies. According to the meticulously organized documents, these were by no means small operations. Crawford Development Group alone boasted assets valued in the millions of dollars. My hands trembled violently as the profound implications of my discovery crashed over me. My father hadn't been simply a janitor who dabbled in handyman work on the side. He had been a shrewd, incredibly successful businessman, a quiet titan who had meticulously built a substantial financial empire, all while maintaining his seemingly humble night job. Likely for the health insurance and steady income, while his carefully chosen investments quietly, steadily grew. But why? Why had he kept this monumental secret from me, his only daughter? Why had he continued to live in our small, unassuming apartment and maintain such a modest lifestyle when he clearly had access to considerable, staggering wealth? I found the answer, finally, in a thick, heavy envelope, addressed directly to me, sealed and bearing my name in Dad's unmistakable, careful handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open, feeling as though I was about to engage in a conversation with my father 5 years after his death. "My dearest Amara," the letter began, its familiar tone instantly bringing tears to my eyes. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've finally decided to go through these old boxes. I always wondered when curiosity would get the better of you." Even in death, Dad knew me so well. I could almost hear his gentle, knowing teasing in those words. "I know this is going to come as a shock, sweetheart," the letter continued, "but your old dad wasn't quite as simple as he seemed. Those weekend meetings and business trips weren't just small-time hustles. Over the years, I built something real, something substantial. But I want you to understand why I kept it from you." The letter eloquently elucidated Dad's deeply held philosophy about money and success. He had grown up poor, experiencing firsthand how wealth could, in some cases, corrupt people, distort their values, and make them lose sight of what was truly important: integrity, hard work, kindness. He had also witnessed how the premature knowledge of family money could breed complacency in young people, dulling their motivation to cultivate their own unique skills and robust character. "I wanted you to become the person you were meant to be based on your own talents and drive," he wrote, his words resonating with profound love and wisdom. "Not because you knew there was money waiting for you. I wanted you to choose your husband for love, for genuine companionship, not for financial security. I wanted you to pursue your dreams because they truly mattered to you, not because you had the luxury of a safety net cushioning your fall." Dad had been meticulously observing my life, carefully ensuring I was developing into the kind of person who could handle wealth responsibly, with integrity and discernment. He had swelled with pride when I graduated college and launched my career in marketing. He had been less enthusiastic, though, when I had quit my job to support Derek's burgeoning business, but he had, characteristically, kept his opinions to himself, allowing me to forge my own path. By now, you're probably wondering why I stayed in that little apartment and kept working as a janitor when I had all these business interests, the letter continued. The truth is, I loved that job. It kept me grounded, reminded me every single day what real, honest work looked like, and it was the perfect cover for my business activities. Nobody expects a night janitor to be closing million-dollar real estate deals. The letter revealed that Dad had been incredibly strategic, almost brilliant, about building his wealth while meticulously safeguarding his privacy. He had masterfully used the night shift to his immense advantage, conducting covert business meetings during the day when most people were at work, and leveraging his janitorial role as an unparalleled means to gather intelligence about the very companies and business leaders he was dealing with. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about a company by emptying their trash and cleaning their offices, Dad wrote, a touch of obvious amusement in his words. People think janitors are invisible, so they talk freely around us. I probably knew more about the local business community than most CEOs. His foresight, his quiet genius, was simply breathtaking. But the most pivotal, most heart-wrenching part of the letter came near the end. I've set everything up so that you'll inherit my business interests, but only when you really need them. I've instructed my lawyers to wait until you're facing a significant life challenge before revealing the full extent of your inheritance. I wanted to make sure you'd had the chance to prove yourself as an independent woman first, to forge your own strength. Dad had, in his infinite wisdom, somehow anticipated that I might one day desperately need his help, his protection. Even though he had passed away years before Derek's cruel betrayal, he had meticulously engineered a safety net, a powerful contingency plan that would only activate when I was truly vulnerable, ensuring that I would never become complacent or dependent on his wealth, but would have access to it precisely when I needed it most. If you're reading this letter, it probably means you're going through something difficult. Maybe it's a divorce or financial troubles or some other crisis that's made you desperate enough to dig through your old dad's dusty papers. Whatever it is, sweetheart, I want you to know that you're stronger than you think you are, but you don't have to face it alone. I am with you. The letter included meticulously detailed instructions for contacting Harrison and Associates and for accessing what Dad lovingly referred to as the full documentation of your inheritance. There were safe deposit box keys, account numbers, and explicit contact information for various business partners, all of whom had been carefully instructed to help me understand the full, awe-inspiring scope of my father's empire. At the very bottom of the letter, Dad had penned a final, poignant message that brought fresh, hot tears to my eyes, a powerful balm to my wounded soul. You were always my greatest investment, Amara, not because of what you might inherit someday, but because of who you are. Your mama and I created something beautiful when we made you. Don't let anyone convince you that you're worth less than everything. Sitting in that silent basement, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my father's secret, extraordinary life, a profound realization washed over me. Derek's cruel betrayal hadn't left me powerless after all. Dad had been planning for this very possibility for years, building not just immense wealth, but a formidable support system, a powerful shield that would activate precisely when I needed it most. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of strength, a quiet certainty that I wasn't facing this daunting battle alone. My father had been preparing me for this fight, meticulously equipping me, without me even knowing it. Tomorrow, I would call Harrison and Associates and begin to truly comprehend just how much my father had really left me. But tonight, I simply sat in the basement, clutching his letter, feeling his profound love and unwavering protection reaching across 5 years, across the veil of death, to remind me exactly who I truly was. Derek thought he'd married a naive woman with no resources, no power. He was about to discover just how spectacularly wrong he'd been about that. The next morning, the anticipation was a tangible thing, a buzzing energy beneath my skin. I waited until Derek had left for work, the familiar roar of his BMW fading into the distance, before finally making the call to Harrison and Associates. My hands trembled as I dialed the number from my father's letter, a part of me still grappling with the sheer impossibility, the fairy tale quality of it all. part of me half expected to reach a disconnected number or a bewildered secretary who had never heard of a Robert Mitchell. Instead, a smooth, professional voice answered immediately. "Harrison and Associates, this is Margaret speaking. How may I help you?" "Hi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, choked with emotion. "My name is Amara Thompson, formerly Amara Mitchell. I believe you have some documents related to my father, Robert Mitchell." There was a brief, pregnant pause on the other end of the line. Then Margaret's voice became notably warmer, imbued with a distinct sense of recognition and even warmth. "Miss Mitchell, we've been waiting for your call for quite some time. Please hold while I connect you with Mr. Harrison immediately." Within a matter of seconds, a deep, familiar voice came onto the line. "Amara, this is Judge Harrison. I'm so glad you finally reached out." Judge Harrison. The same man who was overseeing my divorce case. The man presiding over my present despair was, impossibly, intimately connected to my past, to my father's secret life. The coincidence, once a perplexing anomaly, was now beginning to feel less like chance and more like a carefully orchestrated, brilliant plan on Dad's part. "I'm confused," I admitted, my mind reeling. "You're the judge in my divorce case, aren't you?" Judge Harrison chuckled, a warm, resonant sound. "Actually, no. That's my wife, Judge Patricia Harrison. I'm retired from the bench now and work primarily with estate planning and business law. Your father was one of my longest standing and certainly one of my most fascinating clients." "How did he know that I would need help?" I pressed, the pieces slowly starting to click into place. "And how did he know your wife would be handling my case?" "Your father was an exceptionally perceptive man, Amara. He didn't know the specific details of what you'd face, of course, but he understood that someday you might find yourself in a situation where you needed significant resources and robust legal support. He was a master strategist, a visionary. As for my wife handling your divorce, that's simply fortunate timing, a serendipitous alignment of circumstances. When I heard her mention your name last week in passing, discussing a rather contentious divorce case, I immediately realized that your father's meticulously crafted contingency plans were about to become very relevant indeed." Judge Harrison then went on to explain that he had been managing my father's complex business interests and meticulous estate planning for over 15 years. Dad had been extraordinarily specific about when and how I should learn about my inheritance. He instructed me to wait until you contacted us directly, which would signify that you had discovered his papers and were actively seeking help. He wanted to ensure you were truly in need, that you had developed your own resilience and resourcefulness before revealing the full, monumental extent of what he'd painstakingly built for you. "What exactly did he build?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, still hardly daring to hope, to believe in this unfolding miracle. "Why don't you come to my office this afternoon, Amara? I think it's better if I show you the documents in person. Bring identification and any papers you found in your father's belongings. We have quite a bit to discuss and a great deal to unveil." After hanging up, I spent the morning in a strange, almost surreal state of suspended reality. I moved through the mundane motions of normal life, attempting to focus on a freelance design project, folding laundry, but my mind was racing, a dizzying carousel of possibilities. Every time Derek had dismissed my father as just a janitor, every time he had subtly, insidiously made me feel like I came from nothing, like I should be eternally grateful for his success, he had been fundamentally, spectacularly wrong about who I was, about where I came from, about the deep, powerful roots that anchored me. That afternoon, I drove to Harrison and Associates' opulent office in the bustling financial district downtown. The building itself was a gleaming testament to power and prestige, all glass and polished marble, a stark contrast to the modest, almost humble legal office where I had first met Mrs. Patterson. Judge Harrison met me personally in the elegant lobby, a distinguished man in his 70s with a shock of silver hair and kind, discerning eyes that, surprisingly, reminded me so much of my father. "You look just like your mother," he said, his voice gentle, as we rode the elevator in companionable silence to his executive office. "Your father talked about both of you constantly. He was so immensely proud of the intelligent, capable woman you'd become." Judge Harrison's office was vast and elegantly appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, breathtaking view of the sprawling city. But what truly captivated my attention was a wall adorned with photographs, showcasing him alongside various business leaders and prominent politicians. And among them, several photos of my father, his unassuming smile radiating quiet strength, at construction sites and prestigious business events. "Your father and I first met 20 years ago when he was looking to invest some money he'd diligently saved," Judge Harrison explained, his voice rich with admiration, as we settled into plush leather chairs around a polished conference table. "He was one of the smartest, most inherently brilliant men I ever knew, completely self-taught when it came to business and investing, a true autodidact, a quiet genius." He opened a thick, imposing file folder and meticulously spread a cascade of documents across the table. "Let me show you what your father built, Amara. Let me show you his legacy." The first document was a comprehensive asset summary, a single sheet of paper that made my head spin, my jaw drop in stunned disbelief. Robert Mitchell's estate was valued at just over $8 million, a staggering sum meticulously distributed across extensive real estate holdings, lucrative business partnerships, diversified investment accounts, and various other tangible assets. $8 million, I whispered, staring at the number as if it were an alien construct. "That's the current valuation, yes. Your father was particularly adept at identifying undervalued properties and nascent business opportunities. He possessed an uncanny talent for seeing immense potential where others merely saw intractable problems, a true visionary." Judge Harrison then produced property deeds for a dozen commercial buildings scattered across the city, including, to my utter astonishment, the very office complex where Derek's company was located. My father, the quiet janitor, had been Derek's landlord for the past 3 years, a fact Derek had never mentioned, and, more astonishingly, probably didn't even know. "Dad owned Derek's building? Among others?" I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "Your father was very strategic about his real estate investments," Judge Harrison replied pleasantly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "He preferred commercial properties with stable, long-term tenants, always thinking ahead, always planning for sustained growth. And there were also intricate partnership agreements, definitively proving Dad's significant involvement in 6 different businesses, including the construction company that proudly bore his name and a property development firm that had contributed to several major projects across the city." "But how did he manage all of this while working as a janitor?" I asked, my mind still struggling to reconcile the two disparate images. "Your father was a master of compartmentalization, Amara. He meticulously kept his business activities entirely separate from his personal life, his public persona. Most of his business partners knew him simply as Bob Mitchell, the successful investor and astute businessman. They had absolutely no idea he also worked nights as a janitor, sweeping floors and emptying trash cans." Judge Harrison explained that Dad had used his janitorial job not just as a source of steady income, but as a brilliant, strategic advantage, a clandestine means to gather invaluable intelligence about the very companies and business leaders he was dealing with. He had learned which companies were teetering on the brink of financial collapse, which ones were poised for explosive expansion, and which business leaders were genuinely trustworthy, all by meticulously observing their operations from the inside, an invisible, unassuming spy. "Your father was probably the most well-informed businessman in this city," Judge Harrison said with obvious admiration, his voice tinged with reverence. "He knew more about local companies than their own boards of directors did. He truly understood the pulse of the market, the unspoken dynamics of power and finance. But the most shocking revelation, the one that hit me with the force of a physical blow, came when Judge Harrison showed me a comprehensive surveillance report that Dad had commissioned about Derek 2 years ago. "Your father was deeply concerned about your husband's business practices," Judge Harrison said carefully, his voice softening with empathy. "He suspected there might be some irregularities, some questionable ethics, in how Derek was managing his company finances." The report detailed, with chilling precision, Derek's illicit business operations, including irrefutable evidence of the offshore accounts he'd mentioned to Candace, and meticulously documented several questionable, potentially fraudulent financial transactions. Dad had known about Derek's hidden assets, his web of deceit, long before I had stumbled upon the affair. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, the words a raw, choked whisper. He wanted you to make your own decisions about your marriage, Amara, to arrive at your own conclusions. But he also wanted to make absolutely certain you'd have irrefutable leverage if Derek ever attempted to leave you financially vulnerable, to strip you of your security. Judge Harrison then handed me another document, one that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a detailed dossier on Derek's affair with Candace, a sickening collection that included photographs, damning financial records revealing Derek's extravagant spending on her, and irrefutable evidence of their business relationship, a partnership that extended far, far beyond what Derek had ever admitted to me. Your father hired investigators? I felt a complex mix of overwhelming gratitude and deep-seated embarrassment. My father, the janitor, had known about the cancerous rot in my marriage long before I, his seemingly oblivious daughter, had even suspected it. He was protecting his investment, Judge Harrison said with a slight, knowing smile. Not his financial investment, Amara, but his investment in you. He knew that knowledge was power, and he wanted to make absolutely sure you'd have all the information you needed when the time came to fight for yourself. The file contained incontrovertible evidence that Derek and Candace had been meticulously planning to establish their own company, a venture they intended to fund using assets they had systematically siphoned off and hidden from Derek's current business. They had been discreetly moving money, diverting clients, and strategically positioning themselves to launch their new enterprise, a calculated maneuver that now chillingly explained Derek's arrogant confidence in the divorce proceedings. "This is all legal evidence?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Completely legal and fully admissible in court. Your father made sure everything was obtained through proper, unimpeachable channels. He always operated with the utmost integrity, even when dealing with those who lacked it." Judge Harrison then presented the final, pivotal piece of the puzzle: Dad's will, the very document that had never been properly probated due to what now appeared to be carefully orchestrated administrative errors at the courthouse. "Your father was very specific about the timing of when this will should be revealed," Judge Harrison explained, his voice imbued with the gravity of the revelation. "He instructed me to wait until you were facing a significant life crisis and had actively sought help by meticulously going through his papers. The administrative delays in probating the will were, in fact, entirely intentional, ingeniously designed to ensure you'd inherit at precisely the right moment when you needed it most, when you were ready to wield its power." The will itself was comprehensive, meticulously drafted, and unequivocally clear. It left me everything. The businesses, the properties, the investment accounts, and liquid assets totaling over $2 million that I could access immediately. "There's one more thing," Judge Harrison said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name boldly emblazoned on it. "Your father asked me to give this to you when we met, a final personal message." And inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a brief, heartfelt note in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. "For immediate expenses and legal fees. Don't let anyone push you around, sweetheart. You're Robert Mitchell's daughter, and that means something in this city." As I sat in Judge Harrison's elegant office, surrounded by this overwhelming, undeniable evidence of my father's boundless love and incredible foresight, a profound realization settled over me. Everything had changed. Derek, in his arrogant delusion, believed he was divorcing a powerless, financially dependent woman who would meekly accept whatever meager scraps he offered. Instead, he was about to face someone who possessed more resources, more meticulously documented legal leverage, and more unwavering resolve than he could ever have possibly imagined. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice imbued with a newfound strength, a quiet authority I hadn't known I possessed. Judge Harrison smiled, a knowing, triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Next, Amara, we make absolutely sure your divorce proceedings accurately reflect your actual, formidable financial position. And we make sure Derek truly understands that cheating on Robert Mitchell's daughter was, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of his entire business career." For the first time in months, I felt an exhilarating surge of power, a sense of vindication that was both deeply satisfying and profoundly empowering. Derek had underestimated me, just as he had so tragically underestimated my father. He was about to learn, in the most devastating way possible, that the woman he had so callously betrayed was not nearly as helpless, as vulnerable as she had appeared. Dad had been right. I was his greatest investment, and that investment was about to pay dividends, a reckoning that Derek never saw coming. That evening, a whirlwind of emotions swirled within me. I sat in my car in our driveway for a full 20 minutes before finally going into the house, trying desperately to process the monumental revelations Judge Harrison had unveiled. I was no longer the financially dependent, naive woman Derek believed he was divorcing. I was, in fact, a wealthy woman, possessed of substantial assets, meticulously detailed documentation of my husband's insidious financial crimes, and a formidable team of experienced lawyers ready to fight fiercely for me. But alongside this exhilarating sense of empowerment, a gnawing terror persisted. For 8 long years, I had meekly allowed Derek to make all the major decisions in our relationship. I had deferred to his judgment on money, career choices, even our shared future. Now, I held a cashier's check for $50,000 and inheritance documents worth millions, and I had absolutely no idea how to navigate, how to wield that kind of immense power. Derek's gleaming BMW was already nestled in the garage when I finally stepped inside. I could hear him, his voice casual and animated, on the phone in his home office, likely chattering away with Candace about their day, or perhaps making their insidious plans for a future together, a future built on my ruin. The sound of his voice, brimming with an undeserved happiness, made my stomach churn with disgust. He was still meticulously playing the role of the devoted husband, while secretly, systematically, dismantling our marriage, piece by piece. I gravitated towards the kitchen, a familiar sanctuary, and began the routine act of making dinner, falling back into the rhythm that had, for so many years, defined our relationship. But everything felt different now, imbued with a strange, unsettling resonance. As I chopped vegetables with practiced ease and stirred the simmering sauce, my mind raced, haunted by the memory of the property deeds tucked securely in my purse, the business partnerships that made me wealthier than Derek had ever dreamed, and, most damning of all, the surveillance photos of him with Candace, images that possessed the power to utterly obliterate his carefully constructed reputation in court. "Smells great in here," Derek said, his voice cheerful, as he appeared in the doorway, planting a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken parmesan," I replied, my voice carefully neutral, not trusting myself to say more. Derek loosened his tie, a gesture of relaxed contentment, and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. "Good, I'm starving. Had to skip lunch for a client meeting." He paused, his gaze momentarily studying my face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "You okay? You seem quiet tonight." "Just tired," I managed, the lie slipping out easily. "Long day." It wasn't entirely a fabrication. Learning that your dead father had been secretly wealthy and had meticulously documented your husband's affair was, undeniably, an exhausting revelation. Derek settled at the kitchen counter with his beer, launching into a long, rambling story about his day, a narrative I only half listened to, my mind still reeling. He was complaining about a difficult client, the same client he had probably told Candace he was having lunch with while they plotted their future business together. "Actually," Derek said, his voice tinged with a feigned regret, "I might be working late tomorrow night, too. This project is really heating up." "Another late night with Candace?" The words, sharp and laced with a subtle venom, slipped out before I could stop them. Derek's beer paused halfway to his lips, his eyes widening slightly. "What?" My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced myself to sound casual, almost nonchalant. "Your secretary, Candace, doesn't she usually help with the big projects?" "Oh, right. Yeah, she'll probably be there too." Derek's voice was carefully neutral, almost too casual. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering. Seems like you two have been working together a lot lately." Derek studied my face for a long moment, and I saw a definite flicker of suspicion, a nascent worry in his eyes. But then, with a dismissive shrug, he took another gulp of beer. "She's good at her job. That's why I hired her." The conversation mercifully shifted to safer, more mundane topics, but I could feel Derek's gaze on me, sharper, more scrutinizing for the rest of the evening. I would have to be more careful, more guarded, about concealing what I knew until I was truly ready to act on it. That night, after Derek had finally fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, I carefully spread all of my father's meticulously organized documents across the dining room table. The lamplight cast a warm, focused glow on the papers, illuminating the intricate tapestry of his secret life. Judge Harrison had provided me with copies of everything, but I needed to absorb every detail to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before my next pivotal meeting with Mrs. Patterson. The sheer scale of Dad's business empire was staggering, almost unbelievable. He had owned significant pieces of nearly every major development project that had reshaped the city over the past 15 years. The construction company that proudly bore his name had erected sprawling shopping centers, impressive office complexes, and desirable residential developments throughout the entire region. His property management company oversaw hundreds of rental units, generating a steady, substantial monthly income that had been quietly accumulating in diversified investment accounts for years. But what truly impressed me, what filled me with a profound sense of awe, was the meticulous care with which Dad had documented every single detail. There were exhaustive records of every business decision, every partnership agreement, every financial transaction. He had built his immense wealth methodically, legally, always ensuring that he possessed proper, unimpeachable documentation for everything he did. The stark contrast with Derek's cavalier business practices was glaring, almost cartoonish. The surveillance reports provided by my father's investigators painted a damning picture of Derek cutting corners, illicitly hiding income, and manipulating financial records with blatant disregard for the law, all to avoid taxes and minimize his reported assets. While my father had forged his empire through careful planning, unwavering integrity, and scrupulous legal compliance, Derek had been taking dangerous shortcuts that could, and now would, utterly destroy him if they were brought to light. I found a particularly damning report detailing Derek's offshore accounts, a clandestine network he'd used to funnel money through a series of shadowy shell companies. His purpose: to hide assets from tax authorities, and, more personally, from me. The amounts were substantial, nearly $500,000 that he had systematically concealed over the past 3 years. There were also meticulously detailed financial records, explicitly showing how much Derek had been spending on Candace: expensive dinners at exclusive restaurants, glittering jewelry, luxurious weekend trips, and even a high-end apartment that Derek was secretly renting for her. He had been funding a complete, extravagant second life, a parallel existence, all while admonishing me that we needed to be careful with money. But the most profoundly revealing documents were the email exchanges between Derek and Candace that Dad's investigators had obtained through impeccable legal channels. Reading them made me feel physically ill, a wave of nausea washing over me, but they also solidified my resolve, strengthening my determination to make Derek pay, in full, for his egregious betrayal. "Can't wait until this divorce is finalized," Derek had brazenly written in one email. "Amara has no idea what she's entitled to, and my lawyer says we can probably settle for less than 20% of actual assets. She'll take whatever I offer because she doesn't have the resources to fight it." Candace's response was equally callous, equally sickening. "Poor little Amara. Maybe this will teach her not to marry above her station. Some people are just meant to be followers, not partners." They had been openly, cruelly laughing about my situation, treating the devastation of my marriage like a game they were winning, a sport for their amusement. Derek had systematically isolated me financially, then meticulously planned to discard me with as little compensation as humanly possible, all while confidently moving on to his opulent new life with Candace and the ill-gotten wealth they had accumulated together. But they had made one crucial, fatal mistake. They had fundamentally, spectacularly underestimated who my father was and what he had, with such foresight and love, left for me. I stayed up until 3 a.m, meticulously making notes, organizing the documents into an irrefutable case. By the time I finally crawled into bed, my mind was crystal clear, my position utterly unequivocal. I was wealthier than Derek. I possessed better, more comprehensive legal documentation than he did. And most importantly, I held irrefutable evidence of his financial crimes, evidence that could, if I chose to press charges, send him to prison. More importantly, I possessed something Derek didn't: something he could never comprehend: the moral authority that came from being the wronged party. He was the one who had cheated, lied, and attempted to steal from me. I was simply claiming what was rightfully mine, what had been so carefully bequeathed to me, and ensuring that he faced real, tangible consequences for his reprehensible actions. The next morning, Derek left for work without the usual perfunctory kiss goodbye. I could discern, from his slightly furrowed brow and evasive glances, that he was still replaying my veiled questions from the previous night, wondering if I suspected something. Good. Let him worry. Let the seeds of doubt take root and fester. I called Mrs. Patterson as soon as Derek's BMW had vanished down the street. "Amara?" Her voice, typically calm, held a note of surprise. "How are you holding up?" "I need to see you immediately," I said, my voice firm, resolute. "I have new information that changes everything about my case." "What kind of information?" "The kind that means Derek isn't going to get away with what he's trying to do to me." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, absorbing the unexpected shift in my tone. "Can you be here in an hour?" "I'm already on my way." As I drove to Mrs. Patterson's office, a heavy briefcase filled with documents that would irrevocably alter the course of my life sitting on the passenger seat, I thought about what Dad had so lovingly written in his letter. He had wanted me to become the person I was meant to be, based on my own innate talents and unyielding drive, not because I knew there was money waiting for me, a gilded cage. Well, I had become that person. I had not only survived Derek's profound betrayal, but I had unearthed a wellspring of inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was ready to fight, not just for money, but for my dignity, for what I deserved. The money and power were simply tools, potent instruments that would help me win a battle I had already, decisively, committed to fighting. Derek, in his arrogant blindness, believed he was divorcing a naive woman who would meekly accept whatever paltry sum he offered. Instead, he was about to face a woman who had inherited not just immense wealth, but her father's legendary business acumen, his shrewd determination, and his unwavering refusal to ever let anyone push her around. The real Amara Thompson, daughter of Robert Mitchell, was finally, gloriously ready to stand up and be counted. Mrs. Patterson's reaction to my father's documents was everything I had hoped for, and more. Her eyes, usually calm and discerning, widened perceptibly as I meticulously spread the property deeds, the intricate business partnership agreements, and the comprehensive asset summaries across her desk. By the time she finished reviewing every single document, every single piece of evidence, she was practically radiating with a quiet, triumphant anticipation. "Amara," she said, finally setting down the last document with a satisfied smile, a glint of pure victory in her eyes. "This changes absolutely everything about your divorce case, every single aspect." "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Your husband has been operating under the arrogant assumption that you're financially dependent on him with no substantial assets of your own. These documents prove not only that you are independently wealthy, far beyond his wildest imagination, but that you also possess irrefutable documentation of his hidden assets and his very real financial crimes." Mrs. Patterson explained that the timing of the will's revelation was, from a legal standpoint, absolutely perfect. Since the will had never been properly probated due to the carefully orchestrated administrative delays, it could be presented during the divorce proceedings as newly discovered information that materially and profoundly affected the division of assets. The fact that your father's will was delayed isn't suspicious at all, since there are clear, verifiable records of the administrative issues at the probate court. It just happens to be incredibly fortuitous timing for us. "What about Derek's reaction?" I asked, a thrill of nervousness and anticipation coiling in my stomach. "He's going to be shocked, utterly floored. That's the sheer beauty of this situation, Amara," Mrs. Patterson said with obvious, unadulterated satisfaction. Derek meticulously positioned himself as the wealthy, powerful spouse, divorcing his financially dependent, seemingly powerless wife. When it's revealed that you're actually wealthier than he is, that you possess a formidable empire, his entire legal strategy collapses, utterly and completely. And she then showed me, with expert precision, how this earth-shattering new information would impact every single aspect of the divorce settlement. Instead of Derek paying me a modest, almost insulting alimony, I could now potentially argue that no spousal support was needed at all, given my substantially greater assets. Instead of merely splitting our marital home, I could, if I so desired, buy out his share entirely and keep the house, a tangible symbol of my victory. More importantly, Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice hardening, the irrefutable evidence of Derek's hidden assets and his extensive financial crimes gives us tremendous leverage. We can and will threaten criminal charges if he doesn't cooperate with a truly fair, comprehensive settlement. Criminal charges? I whispered, the words feeling foreign, heavy on my tongue. Tax evasion, financial fraud, money laundering through those offshore accounts. Your father's investigators documented everything beautifully, meticulously, leaving no stone unturned. Derek could face serious prison time if this information becomes public, if we choose to pursue that avenue. The thought of Derek, so arrogant and untouchable, languishing in prison, was both deeply satisfying and surprisingly terrifying. I wanted him to face genuine consequences for his heinous betrayal, but I wasn't entirely certain I was ready to be responsible for utterly destroying his life. "What would you recommend?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We use the potent threat of criminal prosecution to ensure he agrees to a settlement that is actually fair, based on the real assets involved. He keeps what's legitimately his, you keep what's yours, and he pays significant damages for the emotional distress and profound financial manipulation he's put you through. It's a strategic move, Amara, designed to protect you, not to needlessly ruin him." Mrs. Patterson then meticulously explained her comprehensive strategy for the upcoming court hearing. "We would present my father's will as newly discovered information, a critical piece of the puzzle that had to be considered in the asset division. The judge, by legal mandate, would be compelled to review the documents and, most likely, delay the divorce finalization until the inheritance could be properly and thoroughly evaluated. Judge Harrison will handle the will presentation personally, since he is the executive of your father's estate. Having him there will add tremendous credibility to our position and undeniable gravitas." Judge Harrison mentioned that his wife is the judge overseeing our divorce case. Is that going to be a problem? A conflict of interest? Actually, it's perfect. Judge Patricia Harrison is renowned for being extremely fair, but also notoriously tough on people who attempt to manipulate the system, who try to game the legal process. When she sees irrefutable evidence that Derek has been brazenly hiding assets and actively planning to defraud you, she's going to be furious, Amara, righteously indignant. Mrs. Patterson spent the next hour walking me through, step by step, what would undoubtedly unfold at the court hearing. Derek and his high-priced attorney would arrive, smugly expecting a routine divorce finalization. Instead, they would be confronted with damning evidence that Derek had been systematically lying about his assets, while I had been meticulously concealing a wealth that made me far more financially powerful than he had ever been. "The key is to let Derek reveal his hand first," she explained, her eyes alight with strategic cunning. "Let him present his pathetic settlement offer based on his false, arrogant assumptions about your financial position. Then we'll reveal the will and watch his entire, carefully constructed strategy fall apart, piece by agonizing piece." "What about Candace? Will she be there?" "Probably, but that actually works to our distinct advantage. When Derek fully realizes he's about to lose everything, he might foolishly attempt to blame his actions on her influence, on her supposed manipulation, that never ever plays well with judges, particularly Judge Patricia Harrison." Mrs. Patterson also carefully warned me about Derek's likely reactions to the earth-shattering revelation. He would probably cycle through several predictable stages: initial shock, blinding anger, desperate attempts to reconcile, and finally, abject frantic bargaining as the full, devastating extent of his exposure became terrifyingly clear. "Whatever he says, Amara, whatever empty promises he makes, remember that this is the exact same man who spent months meticulously planning to leave you with nothing, while he gleefully started a new life with another woman. Don't let temporary remorse, however convincing, make you forget what he truly thinks of you, what his actions truly reveal." That afternoon, I met with Judge Harrison, the retired one, to finalize the presentation of my father's will. His office was a hive of quiet activity, his efficient staff meticulously preparing the comprehensive documentation that would be presented to the court. "Your father would be so incredibly proud of how you're handling this, Amara," Judge Harrison told me, his voice kind and reassuring as we reviewed the voluminous documents one final time. "He always said you had more strength, more resilience than you knew." "I'm still scared," I admitted, a tremor in my voice. "This is going to destroy Derek's life." "Derek made his own choices, Amara. You're not responsible for the consequences of his actions. Your only responsibility is to protect yourself, to claim what is rightfully yours, and to ensure you get what you're legally entitled to. Remember what your father always taught you about integrity and justice." Judge Harrison then showed me a letter my father had written specifically for this moment, a powerfully worded missive to be read aloud in court, should the situation ever arise where I desperately needed his full, unequivocal support in a legal battle. "Robert asked me to present this as part of the will reading if you ever face someone trying to take advantage of your perceived vulnerability," Judge Harrison explained, his eyes twinkling with a knowing affection. He wanted to make absolutely sure everyone in that courtroom understood exactly who you are, Amara, and where you truly come from, that you are his daughter. The letter was vintage Dad, loving but firm, protective but profoundly empowering. He had penned it as if he had known, with an almost prescient certainty, exactly what Derek would try to do to me. He had crafted his words with masterful precision, ensuring they would unequivocally convey that I was not, under any circumstances, someone to be underestimated, dismissed, or mistreated without dire consequences. "Are we really going to be able to pull this off?" I asked, a lingering doubt still whispering in the back of my mind. "Amara, your father spent 15 years meticulously building the legal and financial foundation that's going to protect you tomorrow. I've spent the last week preparing documentation that will make Derek's deception utterly impossible to deny. Mrs. Patterson has built a case that is absolutely bulletproof. We're not just going to pull this off. We're going to win, decisively and unequivocally." That evening, I dutifully went through my normal routine with Derek, preparing dinner, feigning normalcy, pretending everything was perfectly fine. But inside, I felt like I was vibrating with a nervous, electric energy. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Derek would finally discover that the woman he had so arrogantly underestimated and so callously planned to discard was, in fact, far more powerful, far more formidable than he had ever dreamed possible. Derek seemed distracted during dinner, constantly checking his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, and making cryptic, knowing comments about big changes coming soon. I realized he was probably texting with Candace, excitedly discussing their triumphant plans for after the divorce was finalized, blissfully unaware that their anticipated celebration was about to transform into an unmitigated disaster. "You seem nervous about something," Derek observed, his voice a low rumble, as we cleaned up after dinner. "Just thinking about tomorrow," I replied honestly, my voice a carefully modulated blend of trepidation and anticipation. "The divorce finalization? Don't worry about it, babe. It's going to be quick and painless. We'll both be free to start new chapters in our lives." The casual, almost dismissive way he uttered, "start new chapters," made my blood boil, a hot wave of indignation washing over me. He was so utterly confident that his insidious plan had worked, that he had successfully positioned himself to retain the lion's share of our assets, leaving me with next to nothing. He had absolutely no idea that tomorrow he would discover he had been playing a simple game of checkers, while I, with the quiet, brilliant guidance of my father's long-term strategy, had been playing three-dimensional chess. That night, I lay awake, listening to Derek sleep peacefully beside me, his breathing even and undisturbed. He was probably dreaming about his opulent future with Candace and the vast wealth he smugly believed he had so cleverly hidden from me. My mind raced, envisioning the moment tomorrow when Judge Patricia Harrison would read my father's will aloud in that silent courtroom, and Derek would finally, devastatingly, realize that everything he thought he knew about me, about my origins, about my strength, had been spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. My father had been right about me being his greatest investment. Tomorrow, that investment was going to pay dividends that would not only change my life forever, but would ensure that Derek faced the very real, very painful consequences of his profound betrayal. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face, the utter shattering of his arrogant facade, when he realized he had so foolishly, so tragically, underestimated Robert Mitchell's daughter. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up before my alarm, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a potent cocktail of anticipation and nervousness coursing through my veins. Derek was still sleeping, looking serene and confident, utterly oblivious to the fact that his meticulously constructed world was about to crumble into dust in a mere few hours. I slipped out of bed quietly, moving like a phantom, and got ready in the guest bathroom, carefully selecting the navy blue suit I had purchased specifically for this monumental day. I wanted to project an image of professionalism and unwavering strength, not the financially dependent, grieving wife Derek expected to see. Derek was making coffee when I came downstairs, dressed in his best charcoal suit, humming a cheerful, self-satisfied tune. He looked like a man on the precipice of closing the biggest deal of his life. "Ready for this to be over?" he asked, handing me a steaming cup of coffee, that familiar, infuriatingly smug smile playing on his lips. "More ready than you know," I replied, taking the cup but pointedly avoiding his gaze. We drove separately to the courthouse, Derek in his sleek BMW, and me in our aging Honda, a symbol of our vastly different realities. As I parked and walked toward the imposing building, I saw Mrs. Patterson waiting for me on the front steps, looking professional, poised, and radiating an unwavering confidence. Behind her, Judge Harrison, the retired one, was gracefully emerging from his car, carrying a thick, leather-bound briefcase overflowing with the documents that would, in mere moments, irrevocably change everything. "How are you feeling?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice gentle, as we walked inside together. "Terrified and excited," I admitted, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Is that normal?" "Completely normal, Amara. You're about to take unequivocal control of your life in a way Derek never, ever expected. That's both immensely empowering and profoundly scary. Embrace it." Inside the courtroom, Derek was already seated with his attorney, Preston. Both of them looked ridiculously relaxed, almost jovial, radiating an air of smug confidence. Preston was shuffling through papers with the casual air of someone who fully expected this to be a swift, routine proceeding. Derek kept glancing back toward the gallery, and I saw Candace slip in through the back door, wearing a brazen red dress that was undoubtedly meant to commemorate their anticipated victory. Judge Patricia Harrison entered promptly at 9 o'clock, her presence immediately commanding the room. She looked stern, professional, and utterly formidable behind the bench. She was smaller in stature than her husband, but carried herself with an unmistakable, quiet authority. "Good morning," Judge Harrison said, settling into her chair and reviewing the case file with meticulous care. "We're here today for the finalization of divorce proceedings in the matter of Thompson versus Thompson. Mr. Preston, I believe you'd like to present your client's final settlement offer." Preston stood confidently, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has prepared a very generous settlement that we believe is fair to both parties, a testament to his goodwill." He then began outlining, with an air of practiced ease, Derek's proposed division of assets. I would get the house, burdened with its substantial mortgage, the older Honda, and a paltry monthly alimony payment of $1,500. Derek, of course, would retain his thriving business, his gleaming BMW, his luxury boat, and his substantial retirement accounts. According to Preston's carefully constructed presentation, this represented an equal division of marital assets. "Your Honor," Preston concluded, his voice dripping with false magnanimity, "my client has been more than fair in this settlement. Mrs. Thompson will be well provided for, while Mr. Thompson legitimately retains the business assets he built through his own hard work and expertise." Derek was nodding along, looking incredibly pleased with his attorney's performance. In the gallery, I could see Candace smiling, a triumphant, almost predatory gleam in her eyes. Judge Harrison looked at me, her gaze piercing. "Mrs. Thompson, do you accept this settlement as presented?" I stood up slowly, deliberately, my heart thumping a powerful rhythm against my ribs, but my voice was steady, clear. "No, Your Honor, I do not." Derek's smug smile faltered, the triumph draining from his face. This was not part of his carefully rehearsed script. Mrs. Patterson stood resolutely beside me. "Your Honor, We have significant new information that materially affects the division of assets in this case, information that demands immediate consideration. Preston sprang to his feet, indignation blazing in his eyes. Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly a delay tactic. Mrs. Thompson has had months to present any relevant information she possessed. Actually, Mrs. Patterson replied calmly, her voice unwavering, this information only became available to my client yesterday due to administrative delays in the probate of her father's estate, an issue that we can demonstrate with documentation from the court itself. Judge Harrison leaned forward with keen interest, her expression intrigued. What kind of information are we talking about, Mrs. Patterson? We have documentation showing that Mrs. Thompson has substantial inherited assets that were not previously disclosed because the inheritance was not legally finalized until yesterday. The courtroom went completely silent, a breathless hush descending upon the assembled parties. Derek's confident expression morphed from confusion to dawning concern, then to outright panic. Furthermore, Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice resonating with quiet authority, we have irrefutable evidence that Mr. Thompson has been systematically concealing significant marital assets through offshore accounts and shell companies, with the apparent malicious intention of defrauding Mrs. Thompson in these divorce proceedings. Derek's face went white, a sickly pallor spreading across his features. Preston was frantically whispering in his ear, his words urgent, but Derek wasn't listening. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying blend of shock and recognition, as if he had never truly seen me before. Judge Harrison meticulously studied the papers Mrs. Patterson handed to her, her expression unreadable. This appears to be quite complex. I think we need to examine this new evidence carefully before proceeding. That's when Judge Harrison, the retired judge, stood up from his seat in the gallery, his presence immediately commanding attention. Your Honor, if I may approach the bench, I am the executive of Robert Mitchell's estate and can provide clarification on the inheritance documentation. Derek's head snapped around, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, as he recognized Judge Harrison from various high-profile business events around the city. Wait, Derek stammered, his voice cracking, thick with disbelief. What's going on here? Judge Patricia Harrison looked at her husband with obvious surprise, but nodded, granting him permission to approach the bench. They had a brief, whispered conversation, their heads close. Then she addressed the courtroom, her voice clear and authoritative. It appears we have a highly unusual situation. Mr. Harrison will present information about Mrs. Thompson's inheritance, which was apparently delayed due to probate issues. We will hear him now. Judge Harrison opened his briefcase and carefully withdrew a thick, imposing folder. Your Honor, I have here the last will and testament of Robert Mitchell, Mrs. Thompson's father, which, due to a series of carefully orchestrated administrative delays, was never properly probated following his death 5 years ago. Derek was leaning forward in his chair, straining to hear every word, his confident demeanor completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate, palpable fear. Mr. Mitchell left explicit instructions about the timing of when his assets should be transferred to his daughter, Judge Harrison continued, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. He specified that the inheritance should only be revealed when she faced a significant life crisis and had actively sought help by discovering his private papers, demonstrating her own strength. What kind of assets are we talking about? Judge Patricia Harrison asked, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, lingering briefly on Derek's ashen face. Judge Harrison smiled faintly, a subtle, knowing gleam in his eyes. Commercial real estate holdings valued at approximately $5 million. Partnership interest in 6 local businesses worth approximately $2 million, and liquid assets of approximately $1 million. A total estate valuation of approximately $8 million. The number, $8 million, seemed to echo, to reverberate through the utterly silent courtroom. Derek's mouth literally fell open, a gaping hole of shock. Candace gasped audibly from the back row, her red dress now a symbol of her impending ruin. $8 million? Derek whispered. Then louder, his voice choked with incredulity. That's impossible. Her father was a janitor. Judge Harrison turned to look directly at Derek, his eyes piercing. Mr. Mitchell was indeed employed as a night janitor, Mr. Thompson. He was also, simultaneously, one of the most successful commercial real estate investors in this entire city. In fact, Mr. Thompson, I believe your company leases office space in a building that Mrs. Thompson now owns, among others. Derek looked like he might faint, a clammy sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Amara owns my building? Among others, Judge Harrison replied pleasantly, a subtle hint of triumph in his voice. Now, Your Honor, there's one more document that Mr. Mitchell specifically asked me to read aloud if his daughter ever faced someone attempting to take advantage of her perceived financial vulnerability, her seemingly delicate position. Judge Patricia Harrison nodded, her expression stern, but a flicker of something almost imperceptible, perhaps approval, in her eyes. Please proceed, Mr. Harrison. Judge Harrison unfolded a letter, his voice taking on a gravitas that I could almost attribute to Dad himself. To anyone who thinks my daughter Amara can be pushed around or taken advantage of, you have made a serious, profound error in judgment. Amara is Robert Mitchell's daughter, which means she comes from a lineage of strength, inherent intelligence, and an unyielding determination that has been building for generations. She is not a woman who can be dismissed, underestimated, or mistreated without dire, undeniable consequences. Anyone who attempts to harm my daughter will discover that she has resources and support that extend far beyond what they could ever possibly imagine. By the time Judge Harrison finished reading, the profound silence was deafening. Derek was slumped in his chair, his face a ghostly gray, utterly defeated. Preston was frantically scribbling notes, his pen scratching furiously, no doubt calculating the catastrophic extent of his client's impending trouble. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson said, breaking the heavy silence, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. We also have irrefutable evidence that Mr. Thompson has been systematically concealing marital assets through offshore accounts and shell companies, with the apparent malicious intention of defrauding Mrs. Thompson in these divorce proceedings. She presented the damning surveillance reports, meticulously documenting Derek's hidden accounts, his secret, illicit relationship with Candace, and his insidious plans to minimize my settlement while keeping the vast majority of assets for himself. Judge Patricia Harrison reviewed the documents with obvious displeasure, her brow furrowed in a deep frown. When she looked up, her expression was stern, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, are you aware that concealing assets during divorce proceedings constitutes fraud? A very serious offense indeed. Derek tried to speak, but only managed a strangled, pathetic sound. Your Honor! Preston jumped up, his voice laced with desperation. My client would like to request an immediate recess to review these new, highly unexpected developments. I'm sure he would, Judge Harrison replied dryly, her tone dripping with sarcasm. However, given the irrefutable evidence of deliberate asset concealment and the monumental revelation of Mrs. Thompson's substantial independent wealth, I think we need to completely, entirely reconsider these proceedings. She turned her formidable gaze back to Derek, who was still staring at me in a state of utter shock, his world irrevocably shattered. Mr. Thompson, it appears you've been operating under some serious misconceptions about your wife's true financial position. It also appears that your own financial disclosures have been, shall we say, less than honest. Derek finally found his voice, a desperate, pleading whisper. Amara, he said, turning to me, his eyes wide with a terrifying blend of fear and desperation. We need to talk. This changes everything. We can work this out, please. For the first time that day, I spoke directly to my husband, my voice steady and unwavering, imbued with a power I never knew I possessed. You're right, Derek. This does change everything. But we're not working anything out. You made your choice when you decided to cheat on me and try to steal what was rightfully mine. You made your bed. But I didn't know, he pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand. You didn't know I had money, so you thought it was okay to betray me, to lie to me, to try and strip me of everything? That just proves what you really thought of me all along, Derek, that I was nothing. Judge Patricia Harrison banged her gavel, a resounding crack that brought immediate order to the chaotic scene. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you consult with your attorney about the criminal implications of asset concealment before you say anything else that might further incriminate you. As the judge called for a recess, a much-needed break to allow both sides to reassess their shattered positions, Derek sat frozen in his chair, a statue of utter defeat, while Candace, pale and shaking, fled from the courtroom, her red dress a fading, pathetic blur. His entire world had just spectacularly collapsed around him, and he was finally, agonizingly, beginning to comprehend that the woman he had so arrogantly tried to discard, to render invisible, was, in reality, far more powerful, more formidable than he had ever, in his wildest, most self-absorbed dreams, imagined. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in months, as if an immense, crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My father's brilliant, prescient plan had worked perfectly, beyond my wildest expectations. And Derek was about to learn, in the most devastating way possible, what it truly cost to underestimate Robert Mitchell's daughter. The recess granted Derek and Preston a mere 30 minutes to absorb the crushing, undeniable reality of their catastrophic situation. And when we reconvened, the profound change in their demeanor was absolutely striking. Derek looked like a man who had aged 5 years in half an hour, his face haggard and pale, his eyes hollow with despair. Preston, his usually sharp, confident demeanor utterly shattered, now wore the grim expression of a lawyer who knew, with chilling certainty, that his client was in very, very serious trouble. Judge Patricia Harrison resumed her seat, addressing the courtroom with barely concealed irritation, her gaze sweeping over Derek with a withering disapproval. Have both parties had sufficient time to reassess their positions in light of the new, rather significant information? Preston stood slowly, hesitantly, his voice devoid of its former bravado. Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw his previous settlement offer and respectfully request additional time to prepare a revised proposal that accurately reflects the new, unforeseen financial circumstances. I'm sure he would, Judge Harrison replied dryly, a sardonic edge to her voice. However, given the irrefutable evidence of deliberate asset concealment and outright fraud, I am not inclined to grant Mr. Thompson additional time to manipulate this situation further. The time for manipulation, Mr. Preston, is over. She turned her gaze to Mrs. Patterson. Does your client have a counterproposal, Mrs. Patterson? Mrs. Patterson stood confidently, her posture radiating strength and unwavering resolve. Yes, Your Honor. Given that Mrs. Thompson now possesses substantially greater assets than Mr. Thompson, and given his egregious attempts to defraud her during these proceedings, we propose the following. Mrs. Thompson will retain all of her inherited assets, which are considerable and legally distinct. Mr. Thompson will retain his legitimately disclosed business assets. However, any assets that Mr. Thompson concealed during these proceedings, any funds hidden in offshore accounts or shell companies, will be immediately forfeited to Mrs. Thompson as rightful compensation for his fraudulent and deceitful behavior. Derek shot to his feet, a guttural cry of protest escaping his lips. That's not fair! You can't just take my money because I didn't mention every account. Judge Harrison fixed him with a withering stare, her voice sharp and uncompromising. Mr. Thompson, you will address this court properly, or you will be held in contempt. And not mentioning hidden offshore accounts, sir, is not an oversight. It is called fraud. Preston frantically put a restraining hand on Derek's arm, but the damage was done. Derek had, in his panicked outburst, essentially admitted to concealing assets in front of a judge. Furthermore, Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice clear and precise, Mrs. Thompson requests that Mr. Thompson pay her substantial legal fees and significant damages for the profound emotional distress and insidious financial manipulation he has put her through. How much are we talking about in damages? Judge Harrison asked, her pen poised. $200,000, Your Honor. Derek made another strangled noise, a pathetic gasp of disbelief. Between the forfeited hidden assets and the proposed damages, he was looking at losing nearly $750,000, a sum that would cripple him. Your Honor, Preston said desperately, his voice strained, that's excessive. My client made some poor personal choices, yes, but your client committed fraud, Judge Harrison interrupted, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He deliberately concealed marital assets with the express intention of depriving his wife of her legal share of those assets. In some jurisdictions, Mr. Preston, that is a criminal offense, a felony. The word criminal hung in the air like a looming threat, heavy with unspoken consequences. Derek was now facing not just devastating financial penalties, but the very real possibility of criminal charges, of prison time. However, Judge Harrison continued, her voice softening slightly, offering a narrow sliver of hope, if Mr. Thompson agrees to the settlement as proposed and makes a full, unequivocal disclosure of all concealed assets, I am inclined to treat this as a civil matter rather than referring it for criminal prosecution. This court prefers to resolve matters without involving the criminal justice system when possible, but integrity must be upheld. It was a clear, unambiguous ultimatum: accept the crushing financial penalties or face possible prison time. Derek looked frantically between his shell-shocked lawyer and me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension that all his meticulous planning, all his cunning manipulation, had backfired spectacularly, costing him everything. "Amara, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking, thick with a desperation I had never heard before. "We were married for 8 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Can't we find a way to make this right?" I stood up slowly, deliberately, feeling every eye in the courtroom fixed upon me. This was my moment to make clear, unequivocally, exactly how I felt about Derek's monstrous betrayal. 8 years, I repeated, my voice steady, imbued with a quiet, powerful resolve. 8 years during which I supported your career, managed your home, entertained your clients, and willingly gave up my own financial independence to help you build your business. 8 years during which you meticulously convinced me that we were partners, working tirelessly toward a shared, beautiful future. Derek's face was pleading, his eyes wide with a desperate hope, but I wasn't finished. And during those 8 years, Derek, you were secretly moving money offshore, meticulously planning to divorce me, and sleeping with your secretary while brazenly mocking me to her face. You called me a situation that you needed to manage. You laughed about how easy it would be to leave me with nothing because I was too trusting to protect myself. Derek winced with each accusation, each carefully recalled word, finally understanding how completely, how devastatingly, his private, cruel conversations had been documented. "So, no, Derek," I concluded, my voice firm and unwavering, "those 8 years don't mean anything to me anymore. They were 8 years of lies, of insidious manipulation, and I'm done pretending they were anything else. I am done." Judge Harrison nodded approvingly, a subtle sign of recognition for my strength. "Mr. Thompson, do you accept the settlement as proposed by Mrs. Thompson, given the alternative?" Derek looked helplessly at Preston, who whispered urgently, concisely in his ear. After a long, agonizing moment, Derek slumped in defeat, his shoulders slumping, his spirit utterly broken. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "I accept." "Very well." Judge Harrison's voice was sharp, definitive. "This court orders that Mr. Thompson will pay Mrs. Thompson $200,000 in damages, forfeit all concealed assets to Mrs. Thompson, and pay all legal fees associated with these proceedings. Mrs. Thompson will retain all inherited assets and waives any claim to spousal support, given her independent wealth and the documented fraud." Judge Harrison banged her gavel, a final resonant thud. "This divorce is granted. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you consider yourself fortunate that Mrs. Thompson is choosing not to press criminal charges at this time. Learn from this." As the courtroom slowly cleared, Derek sat motionless in his chair, a defeated husk of a man, while Preston, visibly relieved that the ordeal was finally over, swiftly packed up his papers. I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder and turned to see Judge Harrison smiling warmly at me. "Your father would be so incredibly proud of how you handled yourself today, Amara," he said quietly, his eyes twinkling with genuine admiration. "Thank you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for protecting me." As I walked out of the courthouse with Mrs. Patterson, a profound lightness settled over me, a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in months, perhaps ever. Derek's cruel, calculated attempt to destroy my life had not only failed spectacularly, but it had, paradoxically, revealed a reservoir of resources and inner strength I hadn't even known I possessed. Over the following weeks, the full, devastating extent of Derek's downfall became painfully clear. Word of his fraudulent divorce proceedings and his attempts to conceal assets spread like wildfire through the local business community, a toxic whisper network that irrevocably damaged his meticulously cultivated reputation and cost him several major, lucrative clients. Candace, faced with the brutal reality that Derek was no longer the wealthy, powerful businessman she had so eagerly pursued, summarily broke up with him and swiftly found a new position with one of his most formidable competitors, leaving him utterly alone to face the wreckage he had created. Derek was forced to liquidate several key assets, including his beloved luxury boat and his sleek BMW, to pay the hefty settlement and mounting legal fees. He ended up moving into a modest apartment across town, a stark contrast to the opulent lifestyle he had so proudly maintained. His consulting business, once thriving, barely survived, clinging on by a thread, and he spent most of his time in a desperate, often futile, attempt to rebuild the shattered professional relationships his own reckless actions had destroyed. Meanwhile, I, with a profound sense of purpose and gratitude, used my hard-won inheritance to establish a charitable foundation in my father's honor, focusing on providing crucial educational opportunities for children from working-class families, ensuring others had the chances Dad never fully got. I also launched my own marketing and design firm, Mitchell Marketing Group, finally, exhilaratingly, pursuing the career ambitions and creative passions I had so willingly, so naively, set aside to support Derek's narcissistic dreams. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Derek called me, his voice hesitant, tinged with a feigned remorse. He wanted to meet for coffee, to explain himself, and ask for my forgiveness. I declined politely but firmly. I had no interest in relitigating the painful past, or in helping Derek assuage his profound guilt about what he had so deliberately done to our marriage, to me. I was far too busy building my exhilarating new life, forging my own path, to waste a single precious moment looking backward, dwelling on the ghosts of a shattered past. The woman Derek had so arrogantly attempted to dismiss as financially dependent and utterly lacking in ambition had, in a stunning reversal of fortunes, become one of the most successful businesswomen in the city. My marketing firm was thriving, a testament to my own talent and drive. My charitable foundation was making a real, tangible difference in the community, embodying my father's values. And most importantly, I was finally living up to the immense potential my father had always, implicitly, explicitly, seen in me. Derek had fundamentally, spectacularly underestimated Robert Mitchell's daughter, and that grave mistake had cost him everything he thought he valued, everything he believed defined him. But it had given me something infinitely more valuable than money, the profound, liberating knowledge that I was stronger, smarter, and far more capable than I had ever dared to believe. My father's wise, long-term investment in me had paid dividends beyond anything he could have possibly imagined. 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I stood in the sun-drenched conference room of my thriving marketing firm, gazing out at the magnificent city skyline, reflecting on how dramatically, how profoundly, my life had transformed. My company, Mitchell Marketing Group, had grown to 15 dedicated employees and was successfully handling high-profile campaigns for some of the city's largest, most prestigious businesses. The charitable foundation I had proudly established in Dad's honor had already awarded scholarships to over 100 deserving students and was actively funding innovative educational programs throughout the region, creating a tangible legacy of hope and opportunity. But the most significant, most profound change was how I felt about myself. The insecure woman who had once defined herself solely through her husband's accomplishments, her perceived lack of independent worth, was gone, irrevocably replaced by someone who knew her own innate value, her own formidable strength, and was no longer afraid to claim it, to live it. "Miss Mitchell," my assistant Sarah knocked gently on the conference room door, her voice a polite murmur. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." I had purposefully kept my maiden name for business purposes, partly to honor my father's incredible legacy, and partly because I never wanted to forget the crucial, hard-won lesson I had learned about the profound importance of maintaining my own distinct identity, my own unwavering self. Derek had once so convincingly persuaded me that being his wife was my singular, most important role in life. I would never ever make that devastating mistake again. My afternoon appointment was with Nathan Cross, a talented architect who was meticulously designing a new community center that my foundation was proudly funding. We had been working closely together for 3 months on the project, and I had been consistently impressed not just by his undeniable professional expertise and creative vision, but by his genuine, heartfelt commitment to creating spaces that would truly serve the families who needed them most, spaces imbued with purpose and dignity. Nathan was everything Derek wasn't: humble, profoundly honest, and genuinely interested in making a positive, lasting difference in the world rather than merely accumulating transient wealth and fleeting status. He was also, I couldn't help but notice, incredibly attractive, with warm, intelligent brown eyes, dark, tousled hair, and a smile that made me remember, with a surprising flutter, what it felt like to be genuinely, deeply interested in someone, rather than merely going through the hollow motions of a dead relationship. "Amara," Nathan said, his voice warm and engaging, as he entered the conference room, rolled blueprints tucked neatly under his arm. "I have some exciting updates on the community center design. I think you're going to be thrilled." Over the past few months, our professional meetings had gradually, subtly, begun to evolve into something more personal, more meaningful. Nathan would often linger after our official business was concluded, engaging me in fascinating conversations about books, about travel, and about our shared, passionate interest in supporting local communities. He had asked me to dinner twice, and both times I had, albeit reluctantly, declined. Not because I wasn't interested, a part of me was undeniably captivated, but because I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to trust my own judgment about men again, not after the profound trauma of Derek's betrayal. "Let me show you the latest revisions," Nathan said, spreading the blueprints across the gleaming conference table. "I think you're going to love what we've done with the children's library space. It's truly magical." As he enthusiastically walked me through the intricate design changes, I found myself watching his hands as he pointed out different features, noting the way his face lit up with genuine passion when he spoke about creating spaces where children could feel safe, inspired, and truly empowered to learn. This, I realized, was a man who cared deeply about things that truly mattered, not just about building a superficial empire or impressing people with shallow material success. "Nathan," I said as he finished his presentation, "this is beautiful, truly beautiful. My father would have loved seeing something like this built in his memory, a lasting tribute to his values." "Tell me about him," Nathan said, settling into a chair across from me, his gaze gentle and inviting. "I know he was successful in business, but you always talk about him like he was much more than that, like he was a profound force in your life." So I told Nathan, openly and honestly, about the man behind the quietly built empire, the devoted father who worked tireless nights as a janitor to provide for his daughter, who accumulated wealth not for its own sake, but to ensure his family would always be secure, protected. The man who taught me, through his quiet actions and profound wisdom, that real success meant lifting up other people, empowering them, rather than cruelly stepping on them to get ahead. "He sounds like a truly remarkable person," Nathan said softly when I finished, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I can see where you got your incredible values, your strength." "It took me a while to remember those values," I admitted, a wistful smile touching my lips. "I lost myself for a few years there, trying to be someone I thought I was supposed to be, trying to fit into a mold instead of simply being who I really was." Nathan nodded thoughtfully, a profound understanding in his eyes. "We all do that sometimes, Amara. The important thing, the truly brave thing, is finding your way back to yourself, to your authentic core, to the person you were always meant to be." "Is that what you did?" I asked, genuinely curious about his own story, a rare moment of openness from me. Nathan then told me about his own journey, a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife decided she wanted someone more ambitious, someone willing to prioritize fleeting money over lasting meaning, over genuine purpose. He had spent 2 challenging years rebuilding his life and his career around projects that truly mattered to him, projects that resonated with his soul rather than just those that paid the most. "I learned that the right person will appreciate who you really are, Amara," Nathan said, his voice sincere and heartfelt, "and the wrong person will, inevitably, try to change you into someone else, someone they want you to be, not who you truly are." The contrast with Derek was stark, almost blinding. Derek had spent 8 years trying to make me smaller, more dependent, less confident in my own judgment, in my own worth. Nathan, conversely, seemed to genuinely appreciate my strength, my fierce independence, and he never, not once, made me feel like I should apologize for my success or temper my ambitions. He celebrated them. "Amara," Nathan said as he prepared to leave, gathering his blueprints, "I know we've talked about this before, and I know you've said you're not ready to date, that you need time, but I was wondering if you might consider making an exception for dinner tomorrow night. Not business, just us. A chance to just connect." I looked at this kind, talented, patient man who had, over months, so gently, so patiently, shown me that not all relationships were about power and insidious manipulation, that some people actually valued honesty, kindness, and genuine connection. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how easily, how naturally the word came. "Yes, Nathan, I think I'd like that very much, more than you know." Nathan's smile was radiant, a pure, unadulterated joy that lit up his entire face. "Really? You mean it?" "Really, but I should warn you, I'm still learning how to trust people again. My divorce was complicated, deeply painful." "I know," Nathan said gently, his eyes filled with understanding, "and I'm willing to go as slowly as you need to, Amara, at your pace." That evening, I called Mrs. Patterson to update her on my life, on this new, blossoming connection. She had become, in the tumultuous aftermath of my divorce, not just my lawyer, but a cherished friend and an invaluable mentor, someone who had guided me not just through the legal labyrinth, but through my transformative transition into becoming a successful businesswoman, a woman of purpose. "I'm so incredibly proud of you, Amara," she said, her voice brimming with genuine warmth, when I told her about Nathan and how truly happy I was becoming. "You've built something beautiful, something incredibly meaningful, from what could have been an utterly devastating situation." "I had a lot of help," I said, acknowledging the profound support network that had lifted me up. "From you, from Judge Harrison, from my father's incredible planning." "You had support, yes," Mrs. Patterson corrected, her voice firm yet gentle. "But you, Amara, made the courageous choice to fight for yourself, to reclaim your life. Not everyone would have had the strength, the resilience, the sheer courage to do what you did." Later that night, I walked through my new house, a beautiful, warm, craftsman-style home nestled in a historic neighborhood, which I had purchased with my hard-won inheritance. It was nothing like the cold, sterile McMansion Derek and I had shared, with its impersonal, modern lines and its sole emphasis on impressing superficial visitors. This house was warm and welcoming, filled with books and art and comfortable, inviting furniture that truly reflected my actual tastes, my authentic self, rather than some anonymous designer's idea of what successful people should want. I thought about Derek, who I had heard was desperately struggling to rebuild his shattered business and his irrevocably damaged reputation. Candace, true to her opportunistic nature, had swiftly moved on to another wealthy businessman, leaving Derek to face the solitary, bitter consequences of his own disastrous choices. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no petty schadenfreude, just a quiet, profound relief that his attempts to destroy my life had failed so completely, so spectacularly. My phone rang, and for a fleeting moment I tensed, hoping it wasn't Derek, attempting yet another futile contact. Instead, it was Nathan. "I hope it's not too late to call," he said, his voice warm and apologetic. "But I wanted to tell you how incredibly happy I am that you said yes to dinner tomorrow. I haven't stopped smiling." "I'm happy too," I said, and realized with a profound certainty that I meant it completely, utterly. "I'm genuinely looking forward to it." "Good. And Amara, thank you for taking a chance on getting to know me. I know it's not easy to open yourself up to someone new after being hurt, after such profound betrayal." After we hung up, I sat in my cozy living room, basking in the warm glow of the lamps, thinking about how far I had come in just one short year. I had transformed from being a financially dependent woman, trapped in a failing, toxic marriage, to being a successful entrepreneur with a thriving business and a charitable foundation that was making a real, tangible difference in people's lives. More importantly, I had rediscovered who I was, truly, beneath all the layers of insecurity and self-doubt that Derek had so subtly, so cruelly cultivated in me over 8 long years. I was Robert Mitchell's daughter, and that, I now understood, meant something profound. It meant I was strong enough to fight for myself, smart enough to build something meaningful, and unequivocally worthy of being loved for exactly who I was. No apologies, no compromises. My father's letter had been absolutely right. I was his greatest investment, not because of the immense money he had left me, but because of the resilient, compassionate, brilliant person he had raised me to be. The inheritance had merely provided me with the powerful tools to effectively fight Derek's betrayal. But my own burgeoning strength and unyielding determination had ultimately won the battle. Tomorrow night, I would have dinner with a man who appreciated my success rather than feeling threatened by it, who valued my fierce independence rather than trying to subtly undermine it. I would continue building my business and my foundation, creating the kind of rich, purposeful life my father had always hoped I would have, a life brimming with authenticity and impact. Derek had tried to reduce me to nothing, to make me disappear into his shadow while he built his fragile empire with another woman. Instead, his very betrayal had, ironically, revealed just how much power I had always possessed, a power that came not from fleeting money or superficial status, but from knowing my own intrinsic worth, from holding fast to my integrity, and from vehemently refusing to settle for anything less than I deserved. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed in my beautiful, comforting home, a sanctuary that was entirely, unequivocally mine, I smiled, thinking about what Derek would say if he could see me now. The woman he had so arrogantly dismissed as lacking ambition had built a more successful, more meaningful, and infinitely more fulfilling life than he had ever managed, even with all his scheming, all his ruthless manipulation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about actively destroying your enemies, about tearing them down. Sometimes it's about meticulously building something so beautiful, so resilient, and so fulfilling that their desperate, hateful attempts to hurt you become utterly, wonderfully irrelevant. I had everything Derek had tried to take from me: financial security, professional success, and most profoundly, the unwavering respect of my community, of myself. But more than that, I had something he would never, ever understand: the deep, abiding satisfaction that comes from knowing exactly who you are, from living your truth, and from defiantly refusing to let anyone, ever again, convince you to be less than your glorious, authentic self. Robert Mitchell's daughter was finally, truly, living up to her full, magnificent potential. And that, I knew with absolute certainty, was worth more than any amount of money Derek could have ever stolen from me. My father's greatest investment had finally matured, and the dividends, I knew, would last for the rest of my empowered life.